Hello, everyone. Are you ready for another crazy interpretation of Christopher Columbus' memoirs and the people that he was with that wrote about those days that they came to America? What's that fucking guy gonna say this time? Crazy bastard. Okay, so after all the craziness in the last episode, and then these motherfuckers finally made it to Hispaniola. It was written that they first made it to Haiti, then Jamana, then Boquillo. And I think it's all by the coast of Haiti there. And Haiti translates to higher ground in the Taino language, just in case any of you motherfuckers care. Probably not. Be like, hey, what are you going to do with that kind of information? Nothing. Anyways, what are you going to go out on a date go on a date with a girl and then walk up on top of a hill and then be like, hey, by the way, this is called Haiti, which means high ground in the Taino language, and we're here on this hill. It's Haiti. The girl will be like, yeah, so why are your clothes still on? Yeah, so they were on this coast of Haiti, and there's another place that was called Jamana, and then Bohio. This is where Christopher Columbus had left his men, and they had come back to finally find him. But that's not where they ended up building. They moved that site location some 70 miles east or something, and built there. But anyways, besides that, on to the memoirs. I mean, how did the Christians even know where these places were? I mean, because Bohio is, from what I learned, is that Bohio meant one of the grass huts that these people lived in. And so if the Christians said, hey, what is this name of the place that we're at here? They'd be like, he's pointing at the house. And he didn't. The Indians didn't know he meant the land, and the Indians are like, "This is Bohio," and they're like, "Oh, so we're in Bohio, the town of Bohio," but the Indians meant the house. So there might have been miscommunication there. But then again, it might have been the name of the town as well. Remember, diversity is strength, as long as you're not trying to communicate. Because if you got different languages, one of them needs to succumb to the other. If there's a bunch of people speaking a different language in a place, it would be a good idea to have a lingua franca, right? Otherwise, how are they going to communicate? By gesturing to each other all day? What kind of diversity is that? Like in today's world, what if like some Muslim or Jewish dude went to like a Mexican neighborhood that was like really authentic, right? And they just didn't want any kind of outside influences, and a lot of people were like new immigrants, right? And they didn't speak a word of English. And so some Muslim and Jewish dude came up and wanted to buy some tamales. But they wanted to know which one had pork in it, because they can't eat pork. If they had pork, they were going to melt. So if they can't communicate it, they're screwed, unless there was a lingua franca, right? Or unless one of them learned the other language. Somebody's going to have to assimilate, right? And so when these Christians came up to these Taino and Carib and different native groups, they're like, hey, we got to communicate. One of us has to learn the other language. And of course, when Ramon Panier was on the island, he was trying to learn everything he could about the Taino. He wasn't there to teach everybody Spanish. He wasn't there to teach everybody about himself. He was there to learn about everybody else. Just imagine like 10 other groups of people coming to that same spot and having different nationalities with 10 different languages, and each one of them names that place to their own liking, right? And so there were like 10 different names for that one place. It'd be hilarious because nobody would know where to go, because you can't tell somebody that Bohio's over there if somebody else called it something, there was 10 different names for it, especially if they couldn't communicate. Because somebody says, okay, which way is Bohio? And they want to gesture to each other which way to go. And the other person doesn't even know what the hell Bohio is, because he's like, in my language, that word doesn't exist. Although diversity in opinion and strategy is strength. So he would call like 10 of his friends over to help him try to figure out what that one guy was trying to say. There you go. I worked for a lot of different construction companies throughout my life, and I remember one particular company I work with. There was a Polish guy that didn't speak more than a couple words of English, and he had been in the States for like 20 or 30 years or something like it. It's crazy that people don't learn stuff, but they get trapped inside their community to where they only speak to Polish people in Polish delis that are down the street and watch Polish TV and radio, and they have their Polish books and their Polish family and Polish friends and Polish construction workers. So they don't need to learn English. It's crazy, but it happens. And Mexican people too, and other cultures. Some people just don't want to assimilate. I don't think they're stupid. They just don't want to assimilate, or don't have the chance to, right? Or the time. They're just like, screw it. Why should I assimilate? Why should I learn English if I could communicate with everybody here in my little community? So, anyways, Columbus and his people, the Europeans, they all came, and they came to Hispaniola, and had a lot of different districts to it. And so when they finally landed at Hispaniola, since the last episode, where they were hitting different islands, when they finally get to Hispaniola, they weren't sure if they were actually there because they had never seen that part of the island before. You're like, are you sure this is the island? Like, yeah, I think so. I just never been to this part because there are a lot of different districts. There was some larger communities and smaller ones, where there's a community on the side of a shore with only 5 or 6 houses, and there was other communities where there's like 50 or 60 houses in them. And they wrote about when they arrived there, like, it's so green here, and there was a bird nest with eggs in it, and they're like, man, it's Christmas time, and the birds are already at it. It's crazy. They assumed that there was never a winter time there. They didn't have that season there. It was always summer, they assumed, on this island. But they said there wasn't any 4-legged animals around besides like some little rat type thing. I forget what the name of that thing was. That was like an edible rat. I forget the name of it. And then they seen a lot of little snakes and lizards. And not as many lizards as snakes, because I guess the Taino were eating lizards at the time. And I know some people of the islands that still eat lizards. I know one guy that has a video of himself cutting up a lizard and cooking it. I was like, man, I don't know if that's legal, but I've seen it with my own eyes in modern times. But that's what they were doing back then too. And then the Christians seen an alligator, and they're like, dude, there's a large lizard there. And they tried to capture it, but it ran away and went into the water. Pretty interesting stuff, huh? The Christians were probably like, man, look at that large lizard. That'll feed us for a week. And then they tried to catch it, and it bit them. I wonder how many people actually got eaten by alligators at that time. Because if they thought they were lizards, they're like, hey, let me pet it, or let it crawl up my arm. But maybe these large lizard alligators, bit off some of the guy's legs or arms or something like that. Then maybe the alligators were influential onto the native people there, because the natives seen the alligator eating people, and they're like, hey, if the lizards like legs and bodies and people, maybe we should eat some. And so they did. Just a hunch. I did see some articles recently, like you get these weird articles in your feed sometimes, and I did see somebody mention that it was a lie that the natives were cannibals, and that the Christians made it up in their memoirs. And I was like, yeah, a lot of these people say that that their culture was passed down through the generations, and like, so 500 years ago, it's like it's hard to pass something down that far. Like, there's like that little kids game, what do they call it, telephone, or Chinese whisper, whatever they call it. There's where you whisper into somebody's ear, and then they whisper into like 10 other people's ears, and each one changes the story up a little bit, and by the time it gets back to the first person, it's completely different. Just imagine that by generation. And with political bias, in each generation, the story could take a huge turn. If family tradition was passed down through all those years, just imagine how different it could be like 500 years later. And 20th century, then 21st century, then the guy was like, hey, we didn't need people at all. We only ate the vegetables. We were all vegetarians or something like that, you know. And then the story could change even more than that. Like the next generation, this guy's children will be like, no, we didn't eat any of that stuff. We just drank smoothies all day. Yeah, right. So anyways, back to these memoirs. So the Christians got up to a particular part of the island, and they're like, when they got in that, if you remember that one episode of when Columbus sent some men to an island, and when the men were coming back to the island, there was another group of Indians that came around the shoreline, and they got in a little fight with them and killed one of the Christians. And then they captured the rest of the Indians that were on that boat and took them on the ship. And they also took the dead body. So they had that dead body with them for how many days now? And then so when they got to Hispaniola, they said, okay, let's get to this part of the island and bury this guy. And that captured Indian that they had put clothes on this guy and put him ashore. So it's like, really? Is that what they did back then to this guy? But anyways, that's what's written at least, right? And when they got when some men got to the shore of Hispaniola to bury that one dude and let the other Indian go with clothes on, some other Indians came out with like gold things on their neck and gold earrings and stuff like that. And then they came up to the Europeans and they're like, hey, man, let's go to the ship with you. And the Europeans said, no, we need permission from Christopher Columbus to bring you to the ship. And they said, well, screw you. And then they jumped into their own canoe and made it to the ship. Pretty fucking interesting stuff, huh? So these natives made it to the boat the ship that Christopher Columbus was on, and they said that they wanted him to come ashore and meet the king, and they had a lot of food and gold for him. And Christopher Columbus is like, no, man, we got to go see this other guy, this other king named Guacamari. And he's like, I'll come back, though. Hey, just wait for me over there. I'll see you in a bit, huh? And they're like, fine. Trying to offer you some stuff and hang out with you. Columbus is like, yeah, I'll be back, dude. Don't worry. And so they went back to shore. Yeah, so it's pretty interesting. Columbus is like, hey, can you get a rain check? Take a rain check, could you? So then Christopher Columbus and his people sailed on, and then they stopped at a harbor they called Monte Cristi, and they had fresh water there and stuff like that. And so they got off the boat or off their ship, and it was a real swampy area, so it wasn't a place to build at or hang out at or like screw this place. But they still inspected it for a couple hours, and a couple of guys went downstream and found a couple dead people, a couple of corpses lying there, and they're like, what's this? And so there was later on in the day, somebody found two more dead bodies, and one of the dead bodies had a beard, and they're like, hey man, these Indians don't have facial hair, so that might mean that our guys are dead, or these are our people dead here, supposedly. And everybody was like, yeah man, we're screwed, man, we're gonna get killed, man. And other guys are like, no, it's just some of them got facial hair, you know. So everybody was sad and worried and stuff like that. And then they got on the ship and took off. They're like, so be it, let's go. Like those times were different. I mean, because you can't think like they did back then. I mean, if I came to an island and I seen a bunch of dead bodies around, I wouldn't be looking to make a house there, right? But they were conquistadors, right? So they're used to that stuff. They're like, dead bodies, so be it. You know, let's move on. Craziness. I wonder how the Indians were shaving back then. I didn't research that yet, but a lot of them didn't have facial hair. I don't know why, but that's how they described it, and that's how they knew that these dead bodies. Well, one of them was a Christian because he had facial hair, had a beard. Interesting. So at this point, they were about 6 miles away from where Columbus had left his men from the previous trip. And so they're going to go head that way. I guess he left his men with the Guacamari, the king of that region. And in his writings here, it seems that he might have been the principal leader of the whole island, but who knows? but that's where they're heading back to see if their men were there. And when they were heading back to that area, a canoe of a bunch of natives were heading like really fast towards the ship. And they're like, oh man, what are these guys trying to do? And so the Indians passed them by a little bit and then stopped, stared at them. And the Christians are like, just ignore them. Just ignore them. I don't know what they want to do. It's getting dark. Just ignore them. And then the Indians drove away. Turned around and went back. And they're like, man, it was crazy. What the hell were those guys doing? So the night came, and Christopher Columbus ordered some of the people to fire off a couple Lombard shots into the air. And he says that the people that he left on the island also have Lombard shots. So if he fires them into the air, then other Christians would know that he's there and would fire off in response and be like, yeah, we're here. But it didn't happen. Columbus had people fire him off, and there was no response. And everybody's like, oh man, those guys are dead. Our people are dead. So he's like, yeah, everybody, so let's get some sleep. And he's like, how can you sleep when we know all of our guys are dead? It's like, just count some sheep. But then later on, those dudes in the canoe came back, and they were going to different ships and like saying, hey, where's your leader? Where's your leader at? And they said, over there. And so they got to the ship where Columbus was at. Yes, we want to speak to Columbus. And they're like, he's right here. And they're like, he said, bring the candle. We can't see his face. So they brought the candle and they saw his face. They're like, okay, fine. We'll talk to you. He's like, come on aboard. Hang out. So they got up on the ship with Columbus and started getting drunk and having fun and laughing and joking and talking about different things for hours. And yeah, can you imagine that? Christopher Columbus knew one of the guys from his previous trip. It was a primo of, it was the cousin of Guacamare, the king. The cousin that was in the canoe that came aboard with Columbus. And they were drinking and hanging out, having fun. He's like, remember the old days? He's like, yeah, man, it was so fun. But then there was a moment when Columbus is like, hey, so where are my guys at, huh? And the Indians are like, who? My guys? You know, the dudes that left here, the Christian dudes? Remember? Oh, yeah. Yeah, they're fine. And so the natives told Columbus that the Christians were well, besides a few of them that died from disease, and then a few others that were that killed each other in little scuffles or battles, right? Like some shit like that. That's supposedly what he told them at the time when they were getting drunk. And yeah. But then the cousins started talking about the bad condition that the king was in. The Guacamare guy, he had a wound on his leg, I guess from other invading Indians or other villages that the king's name was Quanabo and Maireni were two different kings that came in and attacked their town and burned their village and wounded their king. And so the story started to open up a little bit more, but it didn't make sense why the Christians were fine at that point still, and supposedly, and only a couple of them died because, like, of what I mentioned. Kind of strange, right? Columbus is probably like, what the fuck are these guys talking about? But then again, like I said, they didn't speak the same language, so they were talking in gestures, right? And if they were getting drunk with each other, it was probably even harder to communicate. There was probably a lot of laughing and like freaking out and like, what's going on here? So the natives went back to land and took off. They said they would come back the next day with Guacamare, the king. And so the next morning, Columbus had some men go on the shore and check out the straw roofs were burnt down. And they went inside and they found some rags and like burnt rags and stuff like that. Well, we could only assume that the rags were thrown in by the natives to burn the place down and kill the people. I guess. I don't know. We don't know. And as these Christians were looking around and checking out the site, there were some natives in the distance that were hiding behind trees and running from the Christians. And Columbus says, that's very, very weird, because he's like, the last time I was here, everybody was cool. And they were so talkative, and it was hard to ignore them, because he said, when I got off my boat, a bunch of natives would surround me and ask me questions and try to touch me and talk to me and all this kind of stuff. And he's like, now they're running from us, and it's very strange. Something must have happened. And with that site being burned down to where the Christians were supposed to be at, and then the dead bodies that they found with the one guy with the beard, everybody suspected that the Christians that they left behind were dead. And they're like, man, this is bad news here. And so the Christians were like, what the fuck are these guys doing? Why are they running? Why are they hiding? Why are they watching us? This is weird. And so they came up with the idea to throw them like hawk bells and like other weird stuff. And they're like, throw it to the natives and to let them know that we're here, that we want to talk with them and that we're cool with them, that we're not trying to hurt them. And the Guacamole king, his cousin was there as well. And yeah, they were throwing them stuff, and then the natives were like, okay, I guess they're peaceful, and let's go talk to them. Pretty fucking strange. Well, that's what's written down. But eventually they started talking with these natives, and again, they asked about where the Christians were, and these natives said that the Christians were all dead. That they got killed in that little battle when they got invaded by the other tribes, supposedly. And now the Christians are like, man, they just told us the other day that they were fine. Now these guys are saying that they're dead. Like, what the hell's going on here? And so, I guess at that moment, what do you say to people in that situation? You're like, okay, I'll take whatever you give me, whatever information you give me. Like, how do you call somebody a liar if you can't speak the same language? And you don't want to call somebody a liar if you know they're lying, because you want them to keep talking so you could see what, try to catch them, in their stuff, right? So anyways, they hung out with the natives again. They got drunk. And the native says, yeah, we'll bring you to the king, or bring the king here, and we'll all hang out and talk tomorrow. And the Christians are like, okay. And so they sent him off. And then they were supposed to come back the next day, but they never came back. And most of the Christians were like, man, those Indians were so drunk that I don't know if they drowned. So a lot of the Christians thought that the Indians drowned from being drunk. That's why they didn't come back. Drunk driving on a log boat in the Bahamas with alligators. So that next day, when they thought the Indians probably died as well from being from drunk driving, Columbus and some of his guys went to the Indian village to witness for themselves. And when they got there, everything was burned down. And some of the guys were like, the king, the Guacamole guy, probably killed the Christians. And everybody was like, no, man, this whole place is burned down. It's obviously they got attacked by somebody else. I'm sure that a lot of the guys knew the Christians that were left there, and they're like, man, I want to see him and see how things are going. They're like, he's dead, man, he's dead. And then Columbus is like, you know what? I told those guys to bury gold if they found any. Search around for piles of gold underground. And one of the guys is like, you got a metal detector? He's like, no, man, start digging. But yeah, those are some crazy situations. These are the notes written by Chanka about these particular situations. So I wonder how it got to the point where Christopher Columbus was getting drunk with these natives. I mean, did he force them to sit there and be like, drink this until you get drunk and I'll let you go home? Or were the natives like cool with them? They're like, hey, we're going to hang out here for a little bit and drink some stuff with you. And so it just shows that, like, in the first trip, he was probably doing the exact same thing. And then he got drunk with a few of the natives, and he's like, hey, guys, I'm going to go back to Spain. I want you 3 drunk guys to go with me, and a couple of those guys over there, too. So we don't know exactly how it happened. But if they were getting drunk with these guys, then there might have been some kind of they were cool, for the most part in those types of situations. It wasn't like he was beating them up and doing anything crazy to them. And if this cousin remembered Columbus from the first trip, like when he came with the canoe to the boat and he wanted people to shine a light to Columbus's face, so he knew it was him. Like he knew that, he knew him from previous events, right? And so he hung out and got drunk with him. So he had to have some kind of trust at that point, right? I don't think I ever remember anybody in modern times history say, "Hey, did you know that Christopher Columbus got drunk with the natives?" That's crazy to think about. But yeah, it happened. According to Chanka, right? He says they were delighted. They were delightful. They were hanging out and having a good time. And then he mentioned in other notes that they were drunk. So put two and two together, they were all hanging out on the ship, having fun, getting drunk. So things weren't as crazy as people make it out to seem, right? It's not like a bunch of Christians came off the boat and just started killing people and enslaving people. That's what the modern day history books want you to believe. From writers like Howard Zinn, that got really popular with his book, that he painted that type of picture. We're going to do an episode on him eventually. Not yet, because I want to cover all this stuff first. So we can go back and be like, remember when we talked about this? Now this guy said this. There was some episodes I deleted. Oh, they're not up anymore. Where I talked about Bartolome de las Casas, and he said that if Christopher Columbus would have known what happened later in the later years on the islands, Christopher Columbus probably would have done something differently. So Columbus was friends with these dudes. And Bartolome de las Casas did talk good about Christopher Columbus. So, yeah, tell that to the modern day history teachers that say, oh, Columbus was a bad dude. Yeah, it's like, come on, really? But you got to mention the times that he got drunk with the natives. How about that time? If he had a TV, they would probably watch the football game together and eat some Cheetos and tamales. An alligator or lizard tacos, right? Anyways, that's it for this episode. We cut it short here. Wait for the next episode. We continue this memoir reading, going over the days of Christopher Columbus, according to the memoirs. Anyways, like and subscribe to the channel. And if you don't like it, you can send it to your enemies and they'll hate you for it. Adios.